Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Working in the coal mine, working in the coal mine. I feel like I'm just chipping that rock there, Tim.
Lord, I'm so tired.
Nice song by...
Hey, here we are with another episode of Exploring the Bizarre. And we meet together every week, same time, same place, for some of the most outlandish conversation on some of the most far-out subject. Because Tim Beckley, that's me, and Tim Schwartz in Indiana, we are co-hosts of Exploring the Bizarre. And I guarantee you will not find any other paranormal UFO show like this on the internet or anywhere else closer than Uranus. And Tim, how are you this evening?
You had to say that just before my intro there. Boy, that's a tough act to follow.
I'll tell you.
I'm doing great tonight, Tim. You know, I don't live that far away from Louisville, Kentucky. It's probably about a 90-minute drive, and so I know you have something to say about today's event in Louisville.
Well, you know, I didn't really get it. Well, tomorrow, I guess, is the big tribute to Muhammad Ali. Today, the TV was filled this afternoon with the news, of course, that Hillary Clinton is the presumptive, I like that word, presidential candidate, first woman to run on a major party. Although I have something to say about that, too. But yeah, you know, I guess it's pretty well known that I did a little bit of jogging and a little bit of sparring with Muhammad Ali back in the 1970s. It turns out, you know, I was working for the tabloids then, doing a lot of celebrity pieces. And one of the questions I always asked the celebrities was, did you ever have like a paranormal experience or a UFO sighting? Well, It turns out that Muhammad Ali was a big champion of the UFO cause. In fact, he invited me to meet him at about 5 a.m. in Central Park so he could tell me about his latest experience. And this was in the newspaper. Apparently, he was out there jogging one morning, getting ready for one of his forthcoming fights. He was with his manager of many, many years, Angelo Dundee, and they happened to see off towards the east side of Manhattan, two very large, distinctly very bright objects passing across the heavens behind some of the very tall skyscrapers. So we called him on the telephone, and his trainer, Angelo Dundee, invited us down to Central Park, and he said, well, you know, Ali's a big believer in UFOs as part of his religious beliefs, and he's had many, many sightings, and he'd be more than happy to talk to you. So we met him down there. He invited us back to his hotel. He told us about some of the sightings, and then he said, you know, I like you guys. Why don't you come on down to my new home in Cherry Hill, New Jersey? So about 2 weeks later, we called him up, and we made an appointment. And what a fabulous house he had. I mean, in the bathroom, the huge chandelier in the living room. In the bathroom, the fixtures were made out of gold. I mean, the guy had started to make some coin, and God bless him, because if you're a prize fighter and you get smacked around like that, although, you know, he stung like a bee and floated like a butterfly. The guy was good looking. You know, he's one of the few prize fighters that after 20 years didn't look like he was the punching bag. He was in excellent shape. So we went down to Cherry Hill. He told us to bring our UFO movies and our UFO slides, and any documents that we had, and we sat in the house for a couple of hours. Now, a lot of celebrities, you do your interview and then they have somebody usher you to the door, but Muhammad Ali wasn't like that. He really liked to share information, and he certainly liked to talk. I mean, this guy could go on for hours and hours. He invited us another time. We went up to his training camp in Deer Park, Pennsylvania, and we brought Uri Geller, the Israeli psychic, with us. And just to show that he was a better magician than Geller was, it turns out that Ali was an amateur magician, and a fairly good one. And he did his version of the rope-a-dope trick, where he cut the rope and then, waved his hand over it and managed to go back together again as if it had never been cut. And when Geller was there, he did a couple of things, too, that were pretty remarkable, but Ali seemed to lose interest in that because apparently Johnny Carson had told him it was fake or something along that line. I don't know, whatever it was. But he was an interesting character, a great humanitarian. And the thing is, Tim, as he went along in his career, he managed to expand his consciousness. At one point, he was the most recognizable person in the world. Something like 99% of the world's population knew who Muhammad Ali was. And tomorrow afternoon, they're having a big tribute in Louisville, which actually that's where my family is from, a little town down the road from Louisville, Shelbyville, Kentucky, where Colonel Sanders opened his first chicken shop.
Right.
Yeah. So there you go, and so I look forward to watching that on TV, even though I can't be there. But enough of my chatter. We have a fascinating as hell show tonight, and I don't think we've ever talked about. We've dabbled in it, but I don't think we've ever really talked about on the air as part of a program the Shaver mystery or the inner earth, and it's a fascinating subject. I'm going to let one of our guests tonight, Richard Toronto, give us a little background on Richard Shaver, because Richard Toronto is the editor of Shavertron, which has been on the internet for many, many years. He's written 2 books, one on Richard Shaver and one on Ray Palmer, who was the original publisher of the Shaver mystery and amazing stories going back to the mid-1940s. And then we have with us, and I'm very excited about this, Maxim W. Furek, is it?
Furek.
It is Furek, correct.
Furek. Okay, well, I was close. And he's written a book called Sheppton, the Myth, Miracle, and Music. Now, I remember hearing about this incident when it first took place in 1963, when 3 miners were entombed more than 300 feet underground near this remote Pennsylvania town. Although 2 of the miners were eventually rescued, the other one had simply and very mysteriously disappeared. Now, this made headlines for, I guess, more than a week. That's how long the men were trapped underground in this cave-in. Well, while they were down there, they had some very unusual experiences. Now, it's not a lot of, it's part of the Shaver mystery, Tim, wouldn't you say, is the experiences of a lot of miners and spelunkers who have actually run into creatures and come across underground cities and some really bizarre phenomena.
Oh, very much so, yeah.
Yeah. And of course, the so-called experts or the authorities will say, oh, they were hallucinating. Well, how come they all hallucinate the same phenomena? That's what I want to know. Well, right. Anyway, while these gentlemen were entombed underground before they were rescued, they saw bizarre humanoid creatures and stairwells leading to a golden city, and they also claimed that they were in the presence of His Holiness Pope John XXIII. And so tonight we're going to hear from Maxim, who's written this very exciting book. He lives very near where this incident took place. And I believe, were you not born in the town where Richard Shaver was born?
That's right. Richard Shaver and I were both born in Berwick, Pennsylvania. So I'm just, I was really excited to have discovered him, when I was doing my research. And also I wanted to thank Richard Toronto for his wonderful war over LEMURIA. I just finished reading that last week, and I thought it was a well-detailed and researched piece. So congratulations. I think it's an awesome book. So thank you for doing that.
Well,
thank you.
Well, Maxim, why don't we start at the beginning? Give us a little bit of background about this incident that did, like I say, make the press at the time, because every a couple of years, even to this day, there are disasters where miners are trapped underground, and it's a heck of a job to get them out. So, give us a little background, a little history, when this took place, where it happened, and what exactly transpired.
Well, what happened was, it was in 1963. It was August of 63. 3 miners went down, well over 300 feet. There was a mine collapse, and only 2 came out. So there were horrible allegations of cannibalism, and that was one of the elements of Sheppton. But Sheppton has been, it's hard to explain. It's difficult to define. It's been pronounced a continuous collective hallucination. It's been called an out-of-body experience. It's been called a miracle by Pope John XXIII, and also proof of life after death. Fate magazine, that, as you know, Ray Palmer initiated, it described Sheppton as unmatched in the annals of psychic research. And then the Associated Press called Sheppton one of the most significant news stories of the year. And it was surpassed only by the assassination of President John Kennedy on November of 63. So I contend that Sheppton remains Pennsylvania's forbidden urban legend. I think it's something that lies between the natural order and the supernatural. And Tim, as you indicated, yes, the miners said that they saw Pope John XXIII down there for the 2 weeks that they were there. And further, there have been numerous Vatican scholars and academics who have cited Sheppton to be one of Pope John XXIII's miracles.
Now, I had actually, I would have been in my teens at the time when this took place, but the first book that I ever wrote that Gray Barker published was called The Shaver Mystery and the Inner Earth, which is now called Subterranean Worlds Inside Earth. It's gone through, a dozen editions and many printings, and sold tens of thousands of copies in its day. And I remember that was one of the feature items that I had in the book. Okay, so this was in August of 1963. They had gone down. They were digging in the coal mine, correct? And the roof caved in on them.
Yeah. Well, what they were doing was when the larger mining outfits switched to the surface mining, it was more expensive, but it was less dangerous, and it left all of these mines down there. So this was the Sheppton mine was it was actually called Oneida No. 2 Slope. But that mine, they would go down there and they would rob the pillars. They would rob the rich pillars that held up the mine. And they would start in the back and go forward. And in the case of Sheppton, they ran into some problems with that because there was a cave-in. They were just in there. It was happened in the morning. They filled up a buggy, sent it back up, and then when they signaled for it to go down again, the mine cave-in happened. So that was in August of 63. And what was interesting is that the Pope John XXIII had died several months earlier, prior to Sheppton.
So now you say that these men were trapped for how long? Did you say 2 weeks, 14 days?
Yeah, 2 weeks. Yeah, 2 weeks. And
wow.
And one thing too was that it had international attention. I mean, they had from 500. It would fluctuate from 500 to 1,000 people that would congregate there in Sheppton. The Salvation Army, the state police, the National Guard, the paparazzi. You had a whole lot of the media, and you had media coverage from the UK, from Japan, from Germany. I mean, this had international attention and fascination, and just to see what was going to happen with these courageous miners that were trapped under there.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us offhand what were the names of the miners?
Absolutely, yeah. Three guys were down there. One was Henry Throne. He was 28 years old. Dave Fellon, he was the older guy. He was 58, and Louis Bova was 56. Louis Bova was the miner that they never discovered. They never found his body. And back then, when I was just a teenager, the word going around was that he was cannibalized. And even when I did my research, years later, the people down in Sheppton and Oneida and Schuylkill County in what they call the Pennsylvania coal region, many people believe that that cannibalism happened, to this day. So that became part of what I call the Sheppton mythology.
Well, what evidence did they have?
Well, it's a theory. The theory is that he was cannibalized. But what happened was after they rescued Fellon and Throne, a guy named Andy Drabitko was sent down into the tomb to look for the body of Louis Bova. Now, this is interesting because they didn't want Drabitko's wife to know that he was going down there. So they gave him a code name of Mr. X. So what they did is they secreted him in a truck, drove up to the site that had tarps around it. He snuck down in there, looked around, and couldn't find anything. But the crazy thing was that while he was down there, somebody called his wife and tipped her off and let her know that Andy was down there in the mine. But Drabitko went down there and looked around, but couldn't find anything. So there's at least two theories. And, since I've had this book published, the book's only been out for 6 months. But people have come up to me and they have their own theory. They're like breathing more psychic energy into my theory. But there's two theories. One theory is that Fellon and Throne were on the west side and Louis Bova jumped into the east side. So they were separated by tons and tons of rock and coal. And they never even saw each other or communicated. And then, of course, the other theory is that those vile allegations of cannibalism. So this was in 1963, and there's still those rumors going around. The Chicago Daily News had an article about Sheppton and cannibalism, and Davy Fellon said only evil people would make such a claim. Only evil people would do that.
Well, now, if they were down there for 2 weeks, how did they survive? Did they have food rations or water, or did they live off of water that was dripping from the ceiling or something?
No, well, what they had was they had sulfur water, and so they would be sucking on sulfur water. They would maybe be chewing on some of the wood particles from the timbers that they had down there. But
they have a worse diet than I do.
Yeah. After the 6th day, they were able to reach the miners with a 6-inch borehole. They were able to find them. And so then what they did with Sheppton, and this is interesting, they kept on making that borehole bigger and bigger until finally it reached 17.5-inch diameter. Now, an interesting thing was that Howard Hughes, the Houston billionaire, he has had a special drill bit. So they flew it in from Houston, Texas to Hazleton, Pennsylvania by a U.S. Navy fighter jet, and they used that drill bit to help to extricate the miners. So that Sheppton rescue technique that they developed there was later used in Q Creek, Pennsylvania in 2002, but then also in August of 2010 in Chile. And you know about the Chilean copper mine disaster. There was a movie made called The 33. It came out in 2015. Well, right. The Sheppton rescue technique was used to save those 33 miners in Chile. And right outside of Sheppton, there is a plaque that the Pennsylvania Highway Department put up in 2015, attributing the Sheppton rescue technology as a revolutionary means of extricating trapped miners. Because before that, they would have to go back into the slope, take out all the debris, re-timber, and in the case of Sheppton, it was just going to take too long. So they weren't able to do that. So they used this borehole that turned out to be the right thing to do.
Well, now, did the other two miners ever say that they were in contact with the third miner, or I mean, when they came out, they were just like, we never saw him?
No, they said that they heard him, and when they were extricated, again, when they drew them up through that 17.5-inch diameter, they were wearing helmets and these parachute harnesses, and they had grease on them. They had to grease them up, and so they would just drag them through this thing. I mean, it was claustrophobic. And in my book, I tried to make that chapter, and Tim, I think you might have read that, but I wanted to make that chapter the most horrific claustrophobic experience ever. And some of the readers have told me that that was mission accomplished, but it was a horrible thing. I mean, even the rescue was just horrendous. But
well, I tell you, if I were stuck down there, I'd still be down there. I don't need to sending me stuff once a week in the borehole or something like that.
Yeah. So when they rescued them, they were at the Hazleton General Hospital, and both Felon and Throne said that they believed that Louis Bova was still alive. So that's what they said.
That's rough.
That is right. Well, and people don't realize, 300 feet down in a coal mine, that's really deep. I mean, you think about 300 feet, just like across your yard or something like that. You don't think about that. But when you're down in a coal mine, no lights, nothing, you just might as well be in hell.
Well, and it was a hell. They were crawling around on hands and knees. It was pitch black. And they were sucking in the coal particles. They were swilling the sulfur water. And some people were saying that what they saw was induced by hallucinations caused by the sulfur water. But again, you've been doing your program long enough to know that science and the medical community, really doesn't have a vocabulary for the supernatural or the paranormal, and they're quick to just dismiss that as hallucinations caused by minor psychosis or PTSD or the sulfur water. But
we've got a commercial coming up, a commercial break coming up here in a minute, and Tim and I, of course, want to hear more about the incident below ground concerning the mysterious events that took place there. And we also want to bring in Richard Toronto to give us a background kind of on all of this, because it's certainly not the first episode where people underground have had mystical, weird experiences, been attacked by humanoid creatures and so forth. In fact, there is a bar that I visited a couple of times in the mountains of Colorado. It's called Tommy Knockers. And, of course, Tommy Knockers are supposed to be these evil kind of trolls, I guess, that live underground that try to prevent the miners from getting the gold out. And we'll be back in just
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
And welcome back to Exploring the Bizarre. I'm Tim Swartz, and I do encourage you, if you have a question you would like to ask our guests, then please feel free to do so. You can call us, you can tweet us, however you feel comfortable getting your question to us. It doesn't matter. We want to hear from you. So now, Tim, let's bring in our other guest panelist tonight, Mr. Richard Toronto. Richard, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing well.
Fantastic! I'm so happy that we were able to find you and convince you to be on the show with us. Because this really is this is the type of subject that I know that you are interested in, because it really does smack. In my opinion, to a lot of the Richard Shaver types of mysteries, and I know that you love that as well. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got interested in Richard Shaver and his mysteries?
Well, many years ago, in the early 70s, I'd say around 71. I wrote Richard Shaver a letter. Richard Shaver was an interesting character. He was not as famous as Muhammad Ali, maybe, but in this country, the United States, during about 5-year period from 1944 through 1948, everyone who knew about science fiction or the paranormal knew who Richard Shaver and what the Shaver Mystery was, because Ray Palmer, who was the editor of Amazing Stories magazine, promoted Richard Shaver, and the vehicle that he used to promote Richard Shaver was this thing called the Shaver Mystery. Richard Shaver was just I can't say he was just an average guy, but on the outside he kind of seemed that way. You know, he came from Berwick, Pennsylvania, born there, and loved Berwick. He wrote glowingly about his days in Berwick. It was like Mayberry RFD or something.
Yeah, really.
Yeah, it was just this wonderful, idyllic place that he always remembered and wrote about. But he was kind of a bohemian. He graduated high school but never went on to higher education. But like a lot of people in those days, before television and, you know, the internet, he was an avid reader, and he read a lot of the classics. He read in science and mythology. His brother was a writer, and he idealized his brother. His brother wrote for Boy's Life and magazines like that, juvenile magazines, adventure stories. And Richard Shaver kind of wanted to be a writer too, but he never really did so until later years in the 40s. So he hitchhiked his way after high school to Pennsylvania, where his brother was living, or not Pennsylvania, but up in Detroit, and got some jobs, you know, blue-collar jobs. He worked as a foreman for a landscaping company. He worked as a meat cutter in a factory there. He worked in a Ford Motor Company plant. And that's where the story begins for the Shaver Mystery. He never worked in a coal mine. He never worked in any kind of mine. I don't know if he ever went into a cavern or a mine or anything like that, which makes it even more interesting. But
well, I think he did, but it might have been in an astral sense. I mean, there's some debate over whether he was actually in an underground or whether he just you know, I was going to say imagine, but that's not the right word. That he traveled there in his astral state.
That was Ray Palmer's theory. That he astrally went to this place. It was like the lower realm of the astral where he found these evil entities. But I'm, after all these years, beginning to wonder, you know, recently I reread John Keel's book, Our Haunted Planet. You know, Keel was really anti-Shaver and anti-Shaver Mystery, and always just kind of tossed off Shaver like he was just a nut job, like most people did. And he went on to write all these books, like Our Haunted Planet, that basically was saying the same thing Shaver was saying all along. You know, that these ultra-terrestrials, these beings that we don't see, are actually controlling things here on this planet, that electromagnetic fields tie into these paranormal experiences, and well, gee, lo and behold, Shaver was using a welder, which was had a powerful electronic field, magnetic field around it. I could not get out of John Keel in my interview with him back 30 years ago for Shavertron, my fanzine. Couldn't get the difference. Now, why was Shaver insane, and all these other contactees and abductees, which had similar stories, how come you're showing them all this preference? I never could really get it out of him.
Well, that's John Keel, and I knew him fairly well. He was a fan, of course, of Charles Fort. In fact, I was on the board of directors here in Manhattan of his Fortean, New York Fortean Society. And of course, Charles Fort was very sarcastic in a lot of his writings and used a lot of, I guess, satire. So you kind of had to take Keel. He'd say something one day and then maybe change his opinion on it, later on. I mean, he was kind of a mixed metaphor there. He had his own peculiarities, and
I hear what you're saying, because he told me in that interview, he says, well, if you really read my work carefully, you'll see that when I use the term ultra-terrestrial, it's not a theory, it's a literary device. And I'm thinking, okay, what does that mean? So it was hard to pin him down on this stuff, but he was adamantly against Shaver mystery and Shaver and just did not believe any of it. But anyway, getting back to Shaver, he was working in this plant and using the welder, and he said that he started hearing these voices. He didn't know where the voices were coming from. They were just disembodied voices. And over time, he became aware that the voices, wherever they were coming from, were becoming aware of him. So this was kind of making him crazy. And of course, Keel says that part of this phenomenon will make you crazy if you're not crazy already, that paranoid schizophrenia can happen if you have these contactee experiences. So Shaver left the plant. He kind of went on the run from these voices. But what made his experience more of almost an abductee experience was when he was locked in a jail cell, which happened often during the Depression. A lot of men who were just kind of bums and hobos, like he turned out to be, traveling around the country, they would get put in jail for vagrancy, and he was put in jail more than once. In jail, he had the experience where a woman materialized in his jail cell, just out of thin air, and gave him a choice. Do you want to stay here, or will you come with me, and I'll take you to a place away from here where you can help my people?
Hard choice.
So, yeah, hard choice. Yeah, I want out.
I think that the Shaver's women were always scantily clad and very attractive.
That was he had a high imagination that was kind of on the erotic side. Yes.
Mm-hmm. In fact, some people might say that it was 50 Shades of Demon Gray or something.
Yeah, definitely. So, okay, lo and behold, so he's out of his jail cell, he says, and he's now in this place, this underworld city. And he learned that this woman who took him there was a member of this race of beings called Taros. And so he was learning about their culture and found out they'd been down there for quite a long time. But he also learned that their mortal enemy was this group of mutants called the Daros. And that's the thing that he became most famous for, and that everybody really raked him over the coals for. It was like, oh yeah, those Daros. But they were like demon-like characters that, like Keel's ultra-terrestrials, they would manipulate, they would use telepathy to control people. But it could be that the fact that these people under the earth were using mechanisms, they were using machinery to do this, that put Shaver in the psychiatric class of schizophrenic, because in the 20th century, psychiatrists came up with this term, the influencing machine. Okay, and that's part of schizophrenia, that you feel like, these rays are being, aimed at you, and it's causing you all of these problems. There was a case in the 1700s, a guy named Matthews, who was locked up in Bedlam for years, who was very similar to Shaver because he was experiencing these similar things, that there was this machinery. They called it the heirloom. The heirloom had all kinds of weird things attached to it, but it was a machine of some sort. So anyway, Shaver was down under the earth in these caverns and learned all these things. He had these revelations by putting himself under the control of what he called thought records. There were these, I don't know exactly how you could describe the thought records, the way they looked. It was a recording. It was sort of like virtual reality. You could live the life of a person of another time, and that's how he learned the history of all these peoples and the history of Earth, basically. It went way, way, way back. So through these thought records, he learned that Earth had many civilizations, over time, and they were very advanced, that the Earth had been seeded from outer space by other beings, and so he became one of the first, I think, high-profile contactee abductees of the 20th century. But because there was no precedent for it, by talking about it, it just landed him in the nut house. And as my book shows, his wife's family wanted him there too, and they made sure that he ended up there. So he was kind of railroaded into the nut house too.
Now Shaver actually, though, was one of the first to, when he was writing for Ray Palmer's Amazing Stories, he was one of the first writers to actually describe flying saucers, discs from other planets, because he thought they were coming here to rape the Earth of its vital resources.
Well, the first mention of these saucers-like things, they weren't called saucers then. When he talked about it, he called them rollats. A rollat was sort of a anti-gravity device that the cavern people used to go through the caverns, but they could also go out into our atmosphere, above the planet. And so as soon as they started seeing these things, Ken Arnold in 1947, and then Roswell, and then the Maury Island bit, and it all happened around 1947. All this just hit the fan. So voila, Ray Palmer had the verification he needed for the Shaver mysteries. We've been talking about this all the time. Well, and then once again, Keel comes along and writes The Man Who Invented Flying Saucers, which basically his premise was, if Shaver and Palmer had never existed, there would be no flying saucers. That's what he told me. So they created, he said, through the vehicle of science fiction, Ray Palmer took all of these personal experiences of Shaver, wrote it all up, and helped him write it. Did a lot of rewriting, too.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And so it became a collaboration. And they basically, according to Keel, wrote the foundation of what we now know of as the Shaver, or as the flying saucer mythos. So everything, including Men in Black, conspiracies, the look of the saucers, the way they behave, the beings in them, they did all that from basically Shaver's experiences. So the water is so muddy. And then if you count the Shaver mystery fans that were gung-ho and were searching for caves, and the other fans who were, it's sort of like the presidential campaign right now. Everybody's just kind of fighting each other and calling each other names, and that's
and of course the hardcore science fiction fans who were followers of the Isaac Asimovs and whoever were the early writers there from the 40s simply hated Richard Shaver and Ray Palmer.
Absolutely.
because they thought that the two of them had totally bastardized science fiction. And this goes on to this date. most people outside of the field think that there's some great camaraderie between fans of science fiction and the X-Files and people who believe in UFOs.
Yeah.
Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, I remember one time I was in Arizona, and the fellow that wanted me to come over to his a comic book horror science fiction shop so that he could interview me for public access TV. And the gal, Charlotte, that was with me, we went and we did this 2-hour interview, and it was an excellent interview. And finally, she says to the person who's interviewing me, "Well, you have all this, science fiction material here. Why don't you have any of Tim's books or anything on UFOs?" And he said, "Well, if I did, I'd lose all my business." Because the people, who UFO people are not known for spending a lot of money. Where science fiction people will buy the latest superhero, the figures and stuff that they should be old enough perhaps not to want to deal with all that all the time. But that's their business and certainly not mine,
Well, yeah,
fake Spock ears.
They've shoved this into a tiny little fringe area and refused to listen to anything. They accuse Ray Palmer of creating this whole mythos, but at the same time, science fiction fans created their own by just painting everybody as nutballs and crazies. And this is why it's so hard to really understand Shaver, because, like I said, the water is so muddy. Just today, I read a blog post by this old-time science fiction fan who's up there in years, and he was, berating Shaver like they all do, and Ray Palmer, and calling them nutballs, and threw out this little zinger that he described Shaver as a deranged mail carrier. And I said, where the heck did he come up with that? That was like Martin Gardner when he said that Ray Palmer's middle name, he really had no middle name. It was just A. Raymond A. Palmer. He had no middle name. It was just because he wanted to do. These people are really weird. When they don't like something, they will make their own stuff up.
Well, and then, of course, there was this big dispute, especially in later years, between Palmer and Shaver amongst themselves. I don't know whether I can't say they went as far as hating each other, but Shaver to some degree said that Palmer made a lot of the stuff up. And Palmer, on the other hand, said, no, well, how could he make it up? That Shaver was a terrible writer, when he's kind of pretty bad, I have to admit, and that in order to make it commercially marketable, he had to change a little bit here and there. So they went on. I remember in my book, in fact, Subterranean Worlds Inside Earth, there's a whole section in there, each of them giving their, a stance at that particular time as to what was real and what wasn't real. And then, of course, Shaver got into rocks. I mean, he kind of gave up on his writing because I guess Palmer had moved from Evanston, Illinois, or Chicago to Evanston, Illinois to start Fate magazine. In fact, I guess he had both jobs going at the same time. He worked for Ziff Davis, which was a pretty big publisher then, but he wanted to start his own zine because he was getting so much grief from the publishers, Ziff Davis, and from the fans about publishing the Shaver mystery and articles on UFOs and stuff. And I guess basically someone from higher up came into the office and told him to cool it, or he would be let go. So he went out and with Curtis Fuller, and they started Fate magazine, and I think they published their first issue in 1948. And even though it doesn't come out every once in a while, our friend Phyllis Goldie does, I guess, put out an e-version of the magazine and puts out an occasional printed version that she sends out to her many subscribers, because Fate magazine had a tremendous circulation at one point. Well, in fact, Richard did amazing stories. They had to actually steal paper during the war, just because the magazine was selling so much. They had to take it from like the detective line or something in order to make demands.
And Fate magazine, when it came out, it was the only magazine of its kind at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a one of a kind at that point.
Well, actually, I have in my collection, there were some magazines that were published. Now, of course, there were spiritualist magazines and stuff, but there were a few magazines that were published throughout the 30s and 40s that were occult, psychic-oriented. Some of them pretty darn good, actually. I can't remember offhand the names of them, but Fate magazine was the only magazine that held out for 50-odd years. Most of the others came and went. Maybe they'd publish 5 or 10 or 15 editions, and then they'd go into bankruptcy or pull up stakes and do come out with a detective line of magazines, or I guess the early editions of girly magazines, which were like Cheesecake, I believe they were called.
Yeah. Some of them had like groups behind them. Like remember, it wasn't a magazine, but Meade Lane's group, DSRF would put out the round robin, and that went on for quite a while too.
Well, that actually is still published, I think, although I don't know as if they publish anything on Saucers or Shaver anymore. But I know in my collection here, I've got when Riley Crabb was running it, it had a lot of this type of material in the magazine.
Well, when Thomas Brown took over from Riley, Tom kind of took it into the area of radionics and things like that, rather than flying saucers.
Yeah. Well, they had discovered the secret of the flying saucers anyway, so there really was no reason. There really was no reason for them to print articles on it. But they were also the first to talk about Eisenhower's supposed contact at Murdoch Air Force Base.
Wow. So what were we talking about there? Well, anyway, that was a great tangent we got off on.
Well, and unfortunately, we're at our top of the hour break, gentlemen, so we'll continue this conversation in just a few minutes. We'll be right back.
Exploring the bizarre. Your e-ticket ride into the world of the paranormal. Strap yourself in as we traverse the universe, exploring the unexplained. UFOs, ghosts, lost worlds, cryptozoology, as well as other dimensions. It's time to take back the night. Now, your electrifying hosts of Exploring the Bizarre, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
All right, welcome back to the second half of Exploring the Bizarre. And tonight we are talking with Max. Max, I'm sorry. Tell our audience yourself, Max.
Introducing Maxim W. Furek, author of Sheppton,
right.
Myth, Miracle, and Music. And Tim, I just wanted to say for our listening audience that I do have a website presence. It's ShepptonMyth.com. So if anybody's interested in taking a look at that, and that'd be great. ShepptonMyth.com.
And if anybody goes to that site, what are they going to find there?
Well, they're going to see my 3 books. My first book was on a band called the Jordan Brothers. They were the first band. I'm a rock journalist, so the Jordan Brothers were the first band to break Gimme Some Lovin', even though it was written by Spencer Davis Group. My second book in 2008 was The Death Proclamation of Generation X, and I take a look at the connection, the correlation between heroin use and grunge music, Kurt Cobain, Lane Staley, all of that. And then, of course, the Sheppton book that came out the last day of 2015. And the interesting thing about Sheppton was I interviewed Rupert Holmes, the singer-songwriter, back in 1980. And I was working on Sheppton off and on and didn't really like it. And then finally, I thought, I put so much energy into it, so much time, that I have to get it finished. So I hired a couple of proofreaders, and I had it published the last day of 2015. But it was actually 36 years in the making and, working on and off. But finally, I got it done, and I just love the book because I think it has flow. I think it's relatively clean by that, not a whole lot of typos. And I just like it, and I think that, so far it's been resonating with the public. So, that's the great thing. I mean, more people are saying that they like it, and they like the miraculous and the supernatural elements, which sort of took me by surprise, because I thought that there would be a lot of people that were skeptical, but it seems that there's a lot of people out there that want to believe. And I don't know if that's because there's some sort of a reaction against science and medicine that, hasn't always been accurate. I'm not exactly sure what's going on, but I think that I've tapped into some kind of energies out there that are, pretty awesome.
Well, let's hear about some of these strange occurrences that happened to these miners, during that 2 weeks. I mean, we kind of danced around it a little bit during the first half of the program, but let's get into this, Max. I mean, what exactly happened to them when they were down there?
Well, what happened was they were down there for the 6 days, and then the borehole found them. So after the 6th day, they were able to get some food and water, but they were still trapped, and they were still suffering from the claustrophobia and all of that horror. So once they were extricated, and this was after 2 weeks, Fallon, who was 58 years old, the older one, didn't want Throne to mouth off about what happened. And Throne, being young and impetuous, he was telling people about what they saw down there: the stairwells, the creatures, the golden city, the stranger. He called the Pope John XXIII the stranger. And Fallon didn't want him to do that. He said that people are going to think that you're crazy. And it's not that Fallon was looking for any kind of attention. The news reporters, it was like the paparazzi. They just hovered around him, and they just kept on asking him all the questions. What did it feel like to be there? How did you survive? What was it like? I mean, just the same questions over and over and over again. But the craziest thing was that they started to talk about some of the things they saw. One of the individuals that I interviewed, he was a businessman. He had a personal business relationship, a financial relationship with Dave Fallon. And I talked to this guy, and he said that he consented to be interviewed by me, but he didn't want his name mentioned. And I ran into a number of people like that. Some people didn't like Dave Fallon and Hank Throne. They thought that they were very confrontational, that they would say the first thing that came into their mind, they would speak their mind. But this business person talked to Fallon, and Davey was talking about seeing these humanoid creatures, and it's my understanding that for 1 year they had some sort of exclusive deal with the Associated Press, and I believe they had to deal with that publication. But after the 1 year, there was a guy named Bill Schmier. He was with the radio station in Hazleton, and he wrote an article for Fate magazine, and he described the creatures that Davy Fallon saw, and he said that they were non-human creatures. He said that Fallon described them, and I'm reading now, as ruggedly handsome, about 6 feet, 3 inches tall. They had bronze-colored skin, and they had very slightly pointed ears. Fallon said that these humanoids had athletic builds, like football players, and they had thin lips and normal eyes. They wore a wide headband open at the top to reveal dark, straight hair. And both Fallon and Throne, being interviewed separately, would say the same things. I mean, they saw the same things. And one thing that was interesting, there was a guy named Ed Conrad, and Ed Conrad was sort of like a gonzo journalist. Now, I know that Tim Beckley is on one of the websites. They're calling him the Hunter S. Thompson of the paranormal, and Ed Conrad was sort of like that. He was this gonzo journalist who embedded himself into the story. So Ed Conrad befriended Fallon and Throne, and what he did was he took them around, and he had their story tape recorded and notarized and documented. He took them around to different psychiatrists and psychologists, and he had them conduct interviews to see what they were saying was the truth. One of the most incredible things was that he took them down to Headwaters, Virginia, and that was the home of the Swiss psychiatrist, Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And she had written She had written On Death and Dying. I think that was back in 1969, and detailed the stages in understanding the death process. But Kubler-Ross believed that the miner's experience was evidence that death does exist, that a life after death does exist. And she believed that Pope John XXIII, who had died prior to Sheppton, was proof of life after death. And then the other thing is, I talk about Roman Catholic mysticism in my book. And St. Teresa of Avila spoke of 4 levels of mystical prayer. She talked about the altered state of consciousness, a trance-like state. She talked about states of ecstasy and rapture and what she called flight of the soul. And by flight of the soul, she's talking about of out-of-body experience. And both Felon and Throne stated they had numerous out-of-body experiences, and Kubler-Ross believed that this was true. So Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was one of them. Dr. Bruce Grayson, he was a psychiatrist from the University of Connecticut. He was editor of the Journal of Near-Death Studies, and he believed that this was more further documentation of the reality of the other side. He talked about this life after death as being on the other side. Just so many people from the American Journal of Psychiatry, psychiatrists from the University of Pennsylvania. And what I'm trying to say is that it was Ed Conrad who put this all together. He took a real keen interest in the story, the Sheppton story, and without Ed Conrad's intervention, it would have been just a theory, just innuendo, just rumor. But Ed Conrad really took this to the bank and helped to validate the story. So he added another dimension to the Sheppton mythology, and I think we're all indebted to what Ed Conrad did. I just spoke with
what's interesting. Now, most of the stories told by miners of encountering humanoids, beneath the surface, either while they're spelunking or while they're trapped there, they don't describe them. They describe them as being more, the type of creature that you would think of living under ground, more of the type of the Dero than these tall, almost space brother type. I mean, that's what I would equate them with. Wouldn't you, Tim? I mean, they sound like the Space Brothers.
Very much so.
Well, actually, that's not such a far-fetched theory. Well, it is a far-fetched theory, but not to us, perhaps, because there are all these stories that keep looming to the surface over the years about underground alien bases. So, in fact, Shaver said, maybe Richard would know more about this, but Shaver said that there were openings, entrances, to the surface in various parts of the country. In fact, Long John Nebel always liked to tell the story, and I'm sure it was one that he had concocted, about how there was an elevator in Manhattan, and if you knew where the elevator was located, you could get to it. You could get into the elevator, and if nobody else was in the elevator car with you, take it to the basement, and then push a special code by using a series on the buttons in the elevator, and the elevator car would slide sideways and go down even further. Is that right, Rich?
I do remember that. I was going to say about the elevators, that just keep on going. But, I sometimes wonder, these beings, I think, can really appear anywhere they want to. Sometimes they're down there, sometimes they're up there, and the ones that are that Max was talking about did remind me of the Nordic space brother type, which seemed odd because, like Tim, I always think of the underworld ones looking more like the Dero, but according to Shaver, the Dero didn't look like the Dero. They looked different. They were probably a little more attractive.
Well, because the Dero of Shaver's world were really hideously ugly, overweight creatures that had trunks like elephants and huge ears. Or maybe that was just what was on the cover, I think, of the first issue of Hidden Worlds, which was
he described that nose thing. That was something Shaver did talk about, because he said it was some kind of fungus that got into their skin or their flesh, and that it would grow their noses really long.
Right.
Well, now, Max, did the miners attempt to talk to these beings, or what did they just see them and ignore them, or what was the situation? Do you know?
Well, they talked about the light. They wanted these creatures to send light their way, and they claimed that Felon and Throne claimed that they weren't able to do anything in the mine in total darkness, and they claimed that there were humanoids there that was showing light on them. So, but they weren't able to communicate with them. One thing that happened with Felon was pretty straightforward with talking about what happened there in the mine. But when he was being interviewed by the Philadelphia Inquirer, he said that there's some things I simply can't talk about, and that's pretty much what he took to the grave. Felon lived 27 more years after his rescue. He died at age 85, and then Hank Throne lived 35 more years, and he died at the age 63. But what was interesting with Felon and Throne, you were asking about if they were religious. Felon was a devout Roman Catholic. Throne was not. And I believe that what they did was, I believe that there was a miracle that was performed down there by the Pope John XXIII. But I think there was what I call a religious convergence. I think that Hank Throne found religion down there in the tomb. After his rescue, he stopped drinking. He was an alcoholic. He stopped drinking, and he was one of the co-founders of a non-denominational church in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. I think that they created what I would call their own personal religion when they were down there. Tap, pray, dig. They would tap, hoping that the rescue team would hear them. They would pray for deliverance, and they would dig to rescue themselves out of there. So the interesting thing is that Felon, his wife, would not let him go back into the mines. He was driving a school bus after he got out, and then Throne did go back into the mines. But, we talked about that Roman Catholic mysticism, and numerous Vatican scholars have cited Sheppton as one of the Pope's miracles. And there was the Pope John XXIII was canonized in the year 2014. And, you're not made a saint unless they can demonstrate so many miracles. But there was a guy named St. Joseph Mary, and he's one of the executives with the Eternal Word television network. It's the big Catholic conglomerate down there in Alabama. And he, when the Pope was being canonized, there's a YouTube video where Father Joseph Mary speaks of Sheppton having been one of the Pope's miracles. So I know a friend of mine sent me that. When I saw that, I just thought that was just further validation for part of this Sheppton mythology, that just seems to resonate on so many different levels. And it was it's congruent, but it seemingly seems to be incongruent with themes of the cannibalism and the miracle and the spiritual convergence and the technology. I mean, and the humanoids. I mean, there seems to be a lot of things there that, for as bizarre as it is congruent. And I'm not exactly sure what that is. I just think that there's something happening in Sheppton that maybe other places in the world share in common. It reminds me of Forteana. You have a collection of events that share commonality. And in the case of Sheppton, it's humanoids and stairwells, it's golden cities. It's a blending of the miraculous and the supernatural. But then again, maybe these things are part of the same thing. And I know that when I do my presentations talking about the Sheppton research, there's a lot of Catholics in the audience that believe in the miracles, but they seem to be a tad skeptical of supernatural events. And yet I'm thinking maybe they're all of the same fabric, only just different names.
Are they skeptical about the luminous golden city, or how does that fit into the whole thing?
Well, I think they're more skeptical about the humanoids. That's the part. That's the part. But the Golden City and the stairwells, that seems to resonate well. That seems to be something that's holy.
Well, that's like heaven. I mean, kind of going to heaven or something, right?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Well, I was going to say, why don't you tell us a little bit about the golden stairwell in the city? What did they see?
Well, what they saw was stairwells going up to this golden city, but they also saw, and Fallon talked about this at length. Now, the business person that I talked to, he gave me a lot of detail with this, but Dave Fallon said that he saw his family sitting on those stairs, and then he saw people that he believed. He recognized them as being ancestors. He just had a feeling that they were ancestors. So he talked a lot about that. Sitting on the stairwell were his family members, and he had this feeling of safety and security. The thing too that I think is important with Fallon's maturity and Throne's youth was I think what a psychologist would call symbiosis. They had a symbiotic relationship where they were locked into roles. Fallon being the parent and Throne being the child, and I think that role helped them to survive and get through that 2-week ordeal. But after they came out and after they started to talk about the things, the golden cities and everything, a lot of people were challenging them and saying that it was just hallucinations, saying that they were out of their mind, with hallucinations, that they were crazy. And Fallon said, he said, look, I'm a hard-headed miner. I know what I saw. And he kept on talking about that. The only thing when he talked to the Philadelphia Inquirer, he said, there's just one thing that I refuse to talk about, and that's the thing. We don't know what that is, but that's the secret, the mystery that he took to his grave. And we don't know if that was about cannibalism or if that was about something else. We're not sure.
Well, I had heard that there were some revelations about a coming apocalypse, because there always seems to be revelations about a coming apocalypse during, a miracle or a vision or something of that sort.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. There was a researcher named Martin Pichota, and he attributed Sheppton, the visitation, to the mysterious men in black. He evoked that. He claimed that the 3 humanoids was proof.
That's pushing it.
Yeah. I thought so too. I mean, yeah. I included it in my book because when I did the research, he was talking about Sheppton. But I mean, that seemed to be incongruent with everything I know about Men in Black.
Well, also too, that's based on the author's theory, not on what they apparently experienced. Well, now right, did the vision? It seems to be, and I did read quite a bit on this over the years. Every year or so, I would go to the internet and type in and look for more information, and from time to time, stuff would pop up. In fact, I know I did run into I guess a booklet or some kind of literature that seems to me around 20 or 30 pages, and it had a lot of photographs and detail in it. But then when I went back to try to print it out, when I finally got a decent printer, I couldn't find it anymore. It seems that it had been taken.
Was that on Sheppton?
Yes, uh-huh.
It could have been some of the articles written by Ed Conrad.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
But I did try to keep myself up to date on it, and because you hear all these stories, right, Richard, about the miners and the things that happen underground, but they're always kind of anonymous. I mean, there are some. There's one book I have here about the Old West. I think it was written around 1910 or something like that, and it's got a whole chapter in there about 2 miners that came across an underground city. I think it was in Arizona, but it could have been Colorado. And there are some other examples in the literature that's published over the years. But here you had actual names of people that were involved. It wasn't something where it was an anonymous, a story. Mm-hmm. And they seemed like they were lucid. I mean, when they took them, well, what was their mental condition when they took them out of the mine? Do you know?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when they extricated them through that 17.5-inch diameter borehole, Hank Throne pretty much went crazy. He was spinning around. He was out of control. It took him twice as long to be plucked out as it did Felon. Felon was drinking whiskey. They sent whiskey down, and he was singing, "She'll be coming around the mountain when she comes." So Felon was grounded. He was having fun. I mean, he was playing to the audience once he got plucked out. When Throne stood on terra firma, he passed out. I mean, he couldn't handle it. So there was a real difference in their character. Certainly. One thing
well, we got a break coming up here, but we can all go and have a shot of Johnny Walker until we come back in just a few minutes for our last episode. The night is going fast.
Now back to exploring the bizarre with two of the most electrifying researchers in the paranormal. Your hosts, Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz.
Welcome back to the final segment of our program. And Richard Toronto, I'm curious now concerning the case that Max has been talking about. I wonder, and maybe you know this, maybe not. Do you think that Shaver was aware of this story after it happened? And I just wonder what he would have thought about this.
I've never run into any mention in his letters or anything about it. And although Max did say that, didn't Palmer put something in one of his magazines about it back in the 60s?
I don't know if it was Ray Palmer.
Okay.
It seems to me that I had quite a bit of correspondence with Shaver. Of course, he usually sent his letters out typed with a typewriter where he had not changed a ribbon in probably 10 years, and would type it on onion skin paper. And I always felt sorry for Ray Palmer because, being the editor of many magazines over the years, I had several writers who I would open their manuscript and look at it and have to put a blank sheet of paper in the typewriter and start from scratch. It didn't happen very often, and I would not allow it to happen because who in God's name would have the time to do that? But there were a couple of writers who had some valuable and great information, and even if it took me 5 or 6 hours to sit there and rewrite the stuff, I would do that. But Shaver's material that you got, well, my mother disliked Shaver, because once every month or so, Shaver would send me a box of rocks taken from his backyard, and along with the rocks were the soil that they came in and worms.
Really?
Yeah, and the rocks were not very well packed, I would say. They were just kind of thrown in there, Now he had Richard, did he have not some sort of elaborate projection equipment where he projected the rock and then painted over it on a canvas or something? Well, for a long time I thought good old Richard Shaver had rocks in his head or something because I could not see any. Did you ever see anything in the rocks?
Well, he tried to
spit it out. Spit it out. Go ahead.
Occasionally, I could. You have to. He said you have to put a loop on your eye and just kind of let your eye kind of go lazy, and suddenly, once you see one thing, then all of a sudden you start seeing these other things, and then it starts looking really real. But that didn't happen too often. You have to have he said you have to have an artist's eye, and he was an artist, of course, but everybody else couldn't really see a whole lot.
There's actually somebody for a while who was traveling around the country doing a Shaver art show.
Oh, was that Brian Tucker?
Yes.
Or was that Doug Skinner? Doug Skinner, maybe.
Oh, no, it was Skinner, right. Yeah. I remember that show.
Actually, Doug Skinner, who's written for Fate magazine, was a good friend of John Keel's and wrote, of course, on the Shaver mystery. I think I've talked to him, chatted with him on Facebook occasionally. But
Yeah, well,
anyway, the rocks would come in the by through the mail, and I could never quite get the gist of looking at them. But when you looked at the ones that were we bought when Ray Palmer passed away, we bought almost all the books that were left in his warehouse. You know, the books that he printed and was selling, not his private
The Secret
collection.
World.
The Secret World. I had probably about 15 boxes of The Secret World, whatever was left. And they were pretty heavy and very large hardcover books. Printed in color, I might ask, and well
nice
worth
book.
the price of $25. But after sitting in my garage, warehouse / railroad car, whatever you want to call it. They just got to the point where they were kind of brown. They were printed in about 1974, 75. So they had gotten already a little bit of mildew in them. And towards the last, I think we were down to maybe a box or two. And I think Phyllis Goldie at Fate bought a couple of boxes and was selling it. But we had, I don't know, a dozen copies or so. And they were just to the point of I couldn't sell them to anybody, and they were oversized, so they were even difficult to ship to anyone, you know. But they had some beautiful color plates in there, of a Shaver's artwork, and based on the rocks.
Well, you know, Shaver wasn't real happy with the way the color turned out because Ray Palmer used color slides that were Shaver's rejects. And Shaver never could figure out why he did that, because Shaver had, if you notice that the color on some of the rock books, they're just kind of gold color overall. They have a coloration to them that just didn't seem right, and that's because Ray Palmer didn't use the right ones. And I also noticed in studying that book that Ray Palmer started making up his own cut lines on, his own captions on the photos, and they weren't always accurate.
Now, okay, what year did Richard Shaver pass away?
He died in 75.
So that was around the same time that Ray Palmer passed away, within a year or so. Right?
Yeah, 2 years later. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what did he pass away from?
It was pancreatic cancer, I think. But he was a heavy smoker all his life.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, yes.
Yeah, so I don't know. It could have been any number of things, but supposedly on his death certificate it was a heart attack, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I had that heart attack November 5th of 75, and I have here Yellville, Arkansas, the Layton Cemetery. And I was telling Richard I had a chance to contact the Harrison Daily Times down there in Boone County, Arkansas, about Richard Sharp Shaver, and they didn't know anything about him. But
well, I know his workshop. Whoever owned it was trying to sell it. What was that, Richard? About 10 years ago.
Yep.
Gone
now. It's
gone
down.
now.
Yeah.
Oh boy, he had quite a little workshop there. I mean, it was cluttered and all, but everything I guess he needed was there. And he had been married twice?
3 times.
3 times. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The second wife, it was very short. Apparently, it was kind of almost a mail order thing, and she didn't realize. I saw the marriage certificate, and there's a place where it says, "Have you ever been, committed to an insane asylum or something like that?" And he put no. And then one day, his new bride, Virginia Fenwick, ran across some papers that were obviously from one of the mental hospitals he was in, and she packed her bags and left.
Oh.
Yeah, that was a tough one.
Well, there was a gal that I believe I talked to on the phone who claimed that she was Richard Shaver's daughter.
Oh, yeah, Evelyn.
Okay. Was it Evelyn, Tim? I think we corresponded with somebody. Was it Evelyn?
I think so, yes, yeah.
Yeah, uh-huh.
That's true.
Is she still alive?
Yeah, she's 80.
We should get her on the program.
You really should, because no one told her story until I finally did in the second book, the sequel to War Over Lemuria, Shaverology. I gave her a whole chapter of the story of how she went to track down her father's grave in Summit, over in Yellville.
Mm-hmm.
But she was the one element that was never told in the whole Shaver story, and it was really a tragic story how her grandparents just plucked her away from her father, locked him up in the nut house, and basically told her your father's dead. And she believed it for quite a few years.
How many times? He was committed for one period of 5 or 7 years or something like that. Was he in the insane asylum more than once?
Yes, he was. He escaped from more than once from Ypsilanti, Michigan, and then he was on the run for maybe as long as a year until he was kicked out of Canada. He made it all the way to Canada, up to Halifax, and then he was stowing away to go to Liverpool, England on a tramp steamer, accidentally fell through the hold of the ship and onto the boiler of the ship.
Oh, that's rough.
Yeah, that
rough.
Must have hurt. And so they caught him. He was going by an assumed name. Hogan was his last name, he told him. And they later found out, that wasn't his real name. And so he went to court. They deported him back to Boston. And it's really kind of murky what happened to him. But when he got there, apparently there was a board of inquiry over him, what to do with him. And I think that's when they found out he had been on the run from the insane asylum. And he went to Ionia, which was almost like no one ever got out of Ionia. Okay, it was maximum security. But when his father was ill in 1943 and it looked like he was going to die, his mother finally relented and worked some kind of magic and got him out of Ionia, and that's when he got out.
Well, and it was a lot easier to have somebody committed back then, too.
I was just going to say, nowadays you couldn't get yourself, the only way you can get yourself committed is if you show up with an automatic rifle somewhere and aim it at somebody. I mean,
even then.
So he had his troubled times.
It made his life somewhat interesting, though. He certainly didn't have a dull or boring existence,
But it worked against him later, the whole Shaver mystery thing.
I think we should point out, though, that for those who are not that familiar with the Shaver mystery, and actually if you go to Amazon.com and type in the Shaver mystery, you'll find My Subterranean Worlds Inside Earth, as well as a book that Tim did on Shaver. What's the title of that book, Tim?
Let's see. Richard Shaver, was it Mystery of the Inner Earth?
Sounds good to me.
That's been a couple of weeks ago, so I've forgotten the title at this point.
Yeah, we've done 185 books since then.
That's right.
Every time I think that there's no stone left unturned, that there's no theory that we haven't divulged information on or done research on, something comes up, pops up. Like we just completed a book. In fact, I think we'll be talking about this next week. It's Nazi UFO Time Travelers.
Mm. Oh, that's a great title.
Well, our titles in our covers are somewhat sensationalistic. Because I did work for the Inquirer and all. I used to do some of the headlines for the publishers would actually hire me to do their cover lines. And
that was before the Bat Boy, right?
That was in the Weekly World News, but I cannot badmouth the Weekly World News because I would run an ad in there, a full page ad, a very reasonable price. Now, an ad in the Inquirer was like, $25,000 or something because they had a huge circulation, 4 million, nothing like today. But you could get an ad in the Weekly World News, a full page was like maybe $800 or $900. Well, some of the ads that I ran would pull 500-600 orders,
Wow.
Can you imagine that? There isn't a magazine today out there, if you could find a magazine, that you could advertise in that will bring in more than a handful of orders. The times they have changed as far as publishing goes. The only good thing I can say about e-books and books on demand is you don't have to cart around boxes of books that weigh 52 pounds apiece. Because that seemed to be the average weight of a box of books of like maybe 70 copies of whatever title you were selling.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got in, it killed me. I used to get my nephew and we'd struggle to move these things, around because somebody would want 3 cartons of this or somebody would want 2 cartons of that, or you'd have to open a carton and separate them. Whoa, what backbreaking work, But
well, have you heard that James Patterson, the big famous best-selling author, he wants to bring back almost like the dime novel and have them on racks in stores again like they used to be in the old days, and they would be short reads because everyone's attention span has gotten so much shorter.
Well, I used to work for a guy by the name of Joe Bonomo. Have you ever heard of Bonomo Turkish Taffy?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I used to love that, yeah.
Well, Joe Bonomo was billed as one of the strongest men, on the planet or something like that.
Right.
He could pull a railroad car with his teeth. Okay, but he had some kind of deal with Woolworths, and he was selling his stuff in there, and so once you get into an outlet like that, they'll take almost anything that you have. So he had me work on these little mini books, I think that sold for 19 cents at the time. A Globe still has little crossword puzzle books and things like that. Well, he had a calorie counter, which he paid nobody from because he got it from the government or something, that sold like 3 million copies. It was at every checkout counter in Woolworths. So if you had a product like that, you could sell a ton of books. Today, I remember at the height of the paperback publishing craze in New York, you could go into a pharmacy, Dwayne Reed or Rite Aid or one of these big places, and the entire second floor would be made up of nothing but paperback books.
Yeah.
One half would be Brad Steiger's, and the other half of the books would be romance novels. Silhouette books, candlelight, stuff like that. For some reason, they were, they would have somebody do, art of some long hair. Fabio, I think, was the guy that they always used as a model for the cover. Actually, now we had one of the artists that used to do those covers. They paid her like $3,000 for a cover, and I paid her like $150. Because we were not. We had no Fabio. They had to just copy me, And
They just put a wig on you or something?
Yeah.
Well, speaking of books here, Max, what's been the reaction of yours so far?
Well, so far it's been really good. I've been doing a lot of book signings in northeastern Pennsylvania. We're going to be going down to Lancaster on Sunday. And we're going to the Keystone Record Collectors, and there's about 1,000 people that are going to be there. But, part of the draw with my book is that the allegations of cannibalism, 8 years later, there was a song by the Boys called Timothy. And that was a song written by Rupert Holmes. So, as a rock journalist, all 3 of my books have that rock theme in them. And so there's one level of marketing. I mean, I was really enjoying how you guys were talking about the business today. But the book has been out for 6 months, and I don't know if you can offer any recommendations, any suggestions for what I need to do. But I mean, so far for 6 months, it's been a really tremendous ride. A lot of good publicity, a lot of interviews, such as this one tonight. But it's been
one of the great things that you're doing. If it were just an Inner Earth or a Shaver book, you'd be selling them in drips and drabs on the internet. You have a local angle, And so you can go into a Barnes and Noble or some other place there in Pennsylvania and sell to the book to people who are interested in the local angle and not necessarily in the subject. And most of our books don't have that that particular angle to it. I mean, so it's a little bit harder to sell when you got 13,000 competing books on UFOs and something like 28,000 books on ghosts.
Right.
How does anybody find your book? I mean, unless they go to Amazon and type in your name, specifically. If you type in ghost, it could be on the the 27th page or something before they come across your title. So if you're selling books like that, are there any magazines or newsletters or blogs that go to minors?
I've been doing a lot of book signings with historical societies, and they have people that are just starting.
Yes, you could teach me a thing or two. I think that would be the. Now, are there any members of the families left from the miners?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I talked to Louis Bova's son John, and John told me that he thought that his dad was cannibalized. They ate my dad, he said. It's in the book. He said that he was told that by his Uncle Joe, that was Louis, the missing miner's brother. So, that was kind of crazy. But people that I interviewed down in Sheppton, Oneida, and Schuylkill County, there's so many of them just continue to believe that cannibalism was involved in the Sheppton disaster of '63. I mean, that won't go away.
I don't know. I find that I was going to say I find that hard to swallow, but but the whole story leaves a bad taste in my mouth. That's all I know. I mean, what do you think about it? I mean, I don't buy it, but I mean, what do I know?
No, I agree with you. I think that what happened was when they had the cave-in, Felon and Throne jumped into the west monkey shaft. Bova was in the east monkey shaft, and they were separated by all those, the tonnage of rock and coal. That's what I think. And then the other thing, they were able to get food and water after 6 days, but during those 6 days, they drank the sulfur water, and I think they were just so traumatized that I don't think they had any appetite at all. I think eating was probably the last thing on their mind.
I don't know. It's no different than the water that comes out of the pipes here. Or certainly in Flint, Michigan. Hey, listen, we're down to the last couple of minutes here, and time has flown. We have actually dug ourselves deeper, I would say, and we've got to get back together to talk about this subject again. But Maxim, tell me again, where can people find your book? Where can they find you on the internet? And then Rich, you can give us a word or two here. And
yeah, check me out at ShepptonMyth.com. It's ShepptonMyth.com. ShepptonMyth.com. And thank you so much for having me.
Oh, you're welcome.
On your show.
You got to videotape one of your signings or talks or whatever, and put it up on YouTube.
Okay, I'll do that.
Yeah. I mean, I want to find out more about the subject. And Rich, where can people get your 2 books?
Well, there's actually 7 books there.
Oh, 7.
Yeah, there's on Amazon. Just type my name, Richard Toronto, Toronto, and everything will come right up on Amazon.
Mm-hmm. And okay, outside of the 2 on the Shaver mystery, what are the others on?
I was talked into, as you talked me into doing the show, was putting all 29 issues of the original Shavertron into 4 volumes.
Oh my goodness!
And there's 2 volumes called Rock Fogo of Shaver's paintings and rock books and all that. They're strictly about the rock books.
And people are buying those?
Those are very specialized items.
I bet. Okay. Everybody's buying them. Hey, so Tim,
everybody's buying them. Yeah.
Yeah. Tim, we're closing shop here, and so give me my pick and shovel, and we'll dig our way out into and get some fresh air. And you're going to be busy this week working on UFO prophecy.
As always.
All right. We'll see you next week.
You've been listening to Exploring the Bizarre with hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz. They're taking back the night by jetting non-stop across the cosmos in search of the truly bizarre and totally unexplained, with you as their co-pilot. Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Eastern, on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. For more information on Exploring the Bizarre and hosts Timothy Beckley and Tim Swartz, check out their KCOR Digital Radio Network page. Follow their YouTube channel at MRUFO 1100. Exploring the Bizarre.